In 1968, I knew that the chances of ending up in the military were pretty darn good. I was going to Portland State, but the way things were looking, it was fairly clear to me that if I stayed in school, I'd end up getting drafted when I got out of school. And I was in the best physical condition of my life at that time, and figured that if I just allowed them to draft me, that I'd get it over with, get it out of the way, and then I wouldn't have to worry about it and I could go on with my life. So in early '69 I got the notice, and in April of '69 I had my 20th birthday in basic training.
Well, I went into the Army while I was still in nursing school, and it was 1968, and of course at that time the war in Vietnam was at its height, and we had a recruiter come to our school and give us the whole spiel, and I was a good Catholic girl and wanted to do my part, and I was also very patriotic and always believed that everything my country told me, what we were doing, had to be the right thing. And so I thought, well, what better thing to do than to, go into the Army and serve my country. I didn't know for sure that I would go to Vietnam when I joined the Army, but it was, it was pretty much an inevitable thing that the nurses would have to go. And meanwhile, Pat and I were dating, and
we met when she was going to nursing school. I was going to the University of Toledo, in Toledo, Ohio. She went to nursing school in Toledo, Ohio, so that's how we met.
And he was on his way over there about the time when I was.
But I didn't have a choice. I was like, I had a student deferment at the time, but I wanted to drop out and work for a month or a semester so I could pay for my college, and I knew that if I did that they would draft me. So while I was working, I just took time off and went to all different recruiters to find out what branch of service, at least I would have a choice, because if I got drafted it would either be the Army or the Marines. Well, I ended up with the Seabees, which are a construction battalion, and at least I had a choice in it, and I got my draft notice when I was in boot camp at Seabees, at the Seabee, Mississippi. I got my draft notice, so I inevitably would have gotten drafted. So.
And we did actually get to see each other a couple times when we were both there at the same time, which was kind of special. And Pat ended up spending his R&R time when he was supposed to be in Australia. He spent it hiding out in my nurse's quarters, because he shouldn't have been there, because I was an officer and he wasn't, and that was definitely a no-no in the military.
They gave us a battery of tests so that determine where we would be best suited to be directed to. So I was always really good at tests, did really well in school because of that. And so I pulled out all the stops and I did really well. And as it turned out, the 3 or 4 people in the platoon that had the highest test scores were sent into the infantry. And I guess they figured that the sharper you were, the better your chances of survival. So we did infantry training, and then I got to go to Vietnam in September of '69, and this was on the heels of the Tet Offensive. Things were really hot there at the time. Normally we would go out in squad form. The squad leader was pretty savvy. He'd been there a while, and we never walked on roads. We never walked on trails. We would always go cross country and take the work off of compass headings, and at one point we had a what they called a Kit Carson scout with our squad, who was a Viet Cong who had come over to our side, supposedly. And he would spot things. He could spot bunkers that were 6 inches off the ground, deep in the underbrush. He was so sharp at spotting things that it gave you a certain sense of security. The day that I got hit, instead of going out in squad formation, we went out in company formation. And we were told that we were going out to hunt for the remains of a North Vietnamese regiment that had moved into the south for the Tet Offensive. They flew us out in choppers into the area we were going to be working in and dropped us off, and about midday they had us all kind of gather the company together, and somebody started blowing up trees. They had the big Chinook helicopters flying a hot lunch out to us in an area that was known to be inhabited by North Vietnamese. This seemed a little odd, to say the least, but I was just along for the ride. I didn't know what was going on. I was supposed to be walking point this day, but they had the other guy doing it instead. After we had blown up the landing zone and had our hot lunch and had the helicopters come back to pick up the empties, we walked down a dirt road with my squad in the point lead, and totally out of character, but this is what the company commander was having us do. Walked down this dirt road and out into a clearing, and as soon as the front part of the squad got into the clearing, the shooting started. And of course the first person to get killed was our point man. Our Kit Carson scout turned out to be standing next to me, and we were both behind a 7-foot tall termite hill. He had a look of terror in his face, and I heard screaming coming from in the clearing, and I was pretty sure it was our people that were screaming. I should have stayed behind that mound. The fact that the scout had that terrified look was probably a good indication that it wasn't a safe situation. The radio operator, who was back with us by then, was running around yelling for somebody to throw a grenade. So I figured, well, may as well, and I got out from the tree line into the clearing, threw a grenade into the opposite tree line where the shooting was coming from, and proceeded to empty my M16's magazine. I got hit in the chest, and it threw me physically backwards, off my feet. I remember seeing a red flash, just everything went red, and then seeing my weapon flying out of my hand, and thinking that this is like a John Wayne moment, and I was dead. This is what it feels like to be killed. So I was laying on the ground briefly. As soon as I hit the ground, I got back up onto my feet and felt a pang of guilt that I didn't go and get my M16, because the last thing, you're never supposed to leave your weapon. But I figured, I'm dying here, so screw it, let somebody else worry about it. And I went back in the direction I had come, staying as low as I could. Somebody grabbed me and directed me back, and sat me down, and the squad's medic was there and put a bandage on my head. And I didn't know what he was doing. I told him, no, I got it in the chest. And he had a confused look on his face. Well, as it turned out, I had the top of my nose had been ripped open, and my eye was almost shut from the M16 or the AK-47 round had hit the bottom of a M16 magazine that was loaded with bullets, but instead of, it only had 18 rounds instead of 20, so the AK round went through the spring at the base of the magazine, which slowed it down enough so that it stayed inside my chest. But the spring blew the bottom of the magazine apart and took a chunk out of my arm, and a piece of it went up inside my nostril and tore the top of my nose open, and another piece hit me in the cheek and formed a large blood clot in my eye. So the medic thought that I had been hit in the face and addressed that. And when I said, no, down here, he sees the hole in my chest and tells another guy to check my back. And my initial reaction was, no, I wasn't running away. But I realized later that the reason he checked my back is because when you get hit in the chest with an AK-47 round, it makes an exit wound this big in your back and takes your spine out. So the people who survive that experience are paralyzed for life. But the bullet had been slowed down enough by the other stuff that I didn't have the exit wound. They were putting me in a helicopter, and so weird, the things that go through your head. I'm sitting in the helicopter, and they sat me in the middle of it, and I'm thinking, geez, last ride and I don't get to see the view. Next thing I knew, I was being wheeled into the operating room, and I was going in and out of consciousness by then because I'd been losing so much blood. The path of the bullet had gone right through the place where the pulmonary blood vessels and the bronchial tubes cross. And the impact, the shock wave from the bullet had turned my right lung into jelly. So they had to remove it. I spent about a week in the hospital, in the field hospital, getting blood transfusions to get the blood count up enough to where they can move you. And they moved me to Japan, and they've got the hospital there where they make sure you're stabilized and get you processed, and so that they can fly you back to the U.S. While I was in the hospital there, waiting to get processed, the inside of the cavity where the had taken lung out had become infected. And unbeknownst to me, my temperature started to spike, so they shoved a plastic tube into my chest, and when I couldn't breathe because of that, then they gave me some morphine. And my temperature went up to over 106, and I was trying to die again. I ended up surviving that, and eventually getting shipped back to Fort Lewis, the hospital at Madigan General, and was there for 10 and a half months, thereabouts, while they kept my chest cavity open and waited for it to fill in with scar tissue. Once that was finally to the point where they figured there was enough there, they closed it up. As it turned out, they closed it up a little early, and left some of the Pseudomonas bacteria inside, and it took another 15 years for that to surface. I ended up getting disabled, retired from the Army. So now I get to have all of the retired Army benefits, for what those are worth. I can go to PXs. And that ended my Army career. Then we got to start the fun part. Of living afterwards.
The symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder that I exhibited and others that I knew intimately exhibited were not recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder when I came home from Vietnam. It was recognized as antisocial behavior, sometimes criminal behavior, and it took a number of years before the various veterans organizations and the Veterans Administration recognized post-traumatic stress disorder. You go through various stages of post-traumatic stress disorder. I think the first one that I went through was, and it continues probably today, is feeling different, feeling that you're separate from everybody else, feeling that the experience that you had was so unique that no one could ever understand. When you first come back from war, you have intrusive thoughts, and I didn't think of them as intrusive. I'd see large groups of people and I'd be worried that they were gathered together because, you know, a hand grenade could kill a lot of them. A mortar would kill a lot of them. A B-40 rocket would kill large groups. But I wasn't worried for myself. I just thought that they were silly.
Coming back to the States was strange for me. I never, experienced the deal of being spat upon or anything like that. But I do remember coming back and being in my uniform and flew back to Ohio to meet my family, and I just felt like a stranger in a strange land. I just felt like this. I just didn't feel like I belonged here anymore. I remember feeling upset because it seemed like everybody back here was, well, I've written about this in the past, that they were all living their lives just very materialistically. I mean, shopping and wanting to, have the biggest, my father, for example, the biggest boat, the biggest this and that, and I just couldn't relate to any of that stuff. And I also felt, I was still in the Army for a while, and I felt I didn't want anybody to even know that I was in the military. It was up in Fort Lewis, and my roommate and I, we'd go into work in our civvies, our civilian clothes, because we didn't want anybody else in our apartment to know we were in the military, because it was such a strange time as far as the military was just looked down upon. Anybody that had anything to do with Vietnam were the bad guys instead of heroes.
Well, for me it was very immediate. It's like we got processed out immediately within a week, and I was out. And I still had this attitude about it, so I told Colleen one time I did this symbolic thing. I went to the beach the day that I got processed out in California, and there was a big bonfire going, and I ripped off all my military clothes and threw them on the bonfire, my boots, everything. My OD greens and jacket. Just kind of danced around the fire with a bottle of Mad Dog 2020, and I guess I thought that would just like put it behind me, just like burn it up and it's gone. But little did I know that it was going to haunt me into the present day, And so the two of us have been through a lot of counseling and groups.
But not
Just,
for, I mean, either of us, not for over 20 years did we even know that we had anything to deal with. We just knew that we couldn't watch anything having to do with the wall or anything like that, any Veterans Day ceremonies, any movies on Vietnam or anything like that. We just knew that we couldn't watch them without getting really upset. And so we didn't really, do anything about treating ourselves because we didn't really know we needed treatment. And then I went back to the VA was doing a study on women veterans in New Hampshire, and that was in early '98. I just thought, hey, that'd be a chance to go back east and see some sights and visit some people. So I signed up to go, and it was at that point I went through a pretty extensive evaluation and stuff, and that's when I found out I had post-traumatic stress disorder, and it was like getting a diagnosis of terminal cancer is the way I took it. I just thought it was the end of the world. I took it really, really bad, and I just remember the therapist there, I said, so what do I do now? And she said, well, when you go back home, you need to go to the VA and you need to, start seeing someone for it. And I said, I just don't think I want to do that. I'm not willing to do that. For years, I had this thing that I wanted nothing to do with the VA, just from all the stories I had heard about how veterans were treated in the hospitals when they came back, and I just didn't want anything to do with anything that was the government. And I said, so what else can I do? And she said, well, read books and start talking about it. So when I came home, I really had some heart-to-heart with my mother and my sisters, and really kind of opened up about stuff, and we got some books and started reading books.
I'd actually been to the Oregon State Fair, and the VA had a booth there, and it had a list, just this big billboard with a list of all the symptoms of PTSD. And I was with Chris, my son. He was like maybe 3 or 4 years old, and walking by and just kind of locked onto it, and just, I could identify with 9/10 of all the criteria there, and it's just like, that's what got me, at least to snap me into the mindset to go and get some help, so that's when I went to the vet center and started getting some help. Some of these, these different conflicts just kind of spark, spark it back into action again as far as your PTSD. Can lay dormant for a while, and then just different things cause it to flare up again. For us, it's kind of a, if one of us isn't, the other one is. It almost seems like at times, but at least I think we have better understanding of what's going on with each other, and can kind of give each other a little more leeway as far as
Putting up with each other.
yeah, because a normal couple with only one of them being a Vietnam veteran, the other person would just have no idea why they're acting so strangely at different times. What really helped me was, when I was going to counseling, and my counselor told me it was a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. So that kind of validated it for me that I was, it was okay, but, but I needed to work on it, and anybody, and I'm convinced that anybody that was over there is affected in this way, and some people acknowledge it or deal with it, other people just kind of shove it back and end up, pushing it away in different ways, drinking or drugs or whatever. Workaholics, yeah. What's so unique about it is it's not just Vietnam. And we're just talking the PTSD for war situations, but it goes back to the dawn of time, to the beginning of history. I don't care, the Greeks, the Romans, the Civil War, the First World War, the Second World War, they all had different names for it, but it was a similar reaction to something that's just not normal,
Abnormal events.
You know, you've been raised to not kill, to honor life, and then you're all of a sudden you're just dumped into the situation where everything goes, no matter what, and you're not you're not equipped to deal with that. Most people, I mean, you can get through it, but then it comes back. It comes back and haunts you.
I remember for years and years, I used to get up in the middle of the night and walk around the house, check every window, every door, make sure I had shoes next to my bed, make sure I was prepared in case anyone would come to try to hurt me and eventually my family. I remember one night we'd been married for maybe 2 years, and the next morning I got up and I went into the kitchen and went to the sliding glass door, and it was unlocked. And I felt so awful. I felt like I had let my family down. When you've gone through a lot of combat like I did, there's a lot of grief associated with that. In war, you're a man. In war and in combat, you don't have time to feel sorry. You don't have time to cry about the best friend that just got shot in the face and is lying there dying, and the one that next to you has been shot 3 or 4 times. Like my friend Bob Gregory, who was shot 4 times. I ran out of battle dressings trying to save him. I finally took off my boot and my sock, and I wrapped my sock around his shattered arm. Then you've got a corpsman that's laying next to you that can't move, and another guy that's wounded. Those types of things, those horrific experiences are shut down. You have to put your boot back on. You have to pick up your rifle. You have to go back in the field that day. Checking to make sure everything is secure relates back to Vietnam and how nothing was secure. And you tried to make it secure as a soldier. Once you reached the point where you understood the gravity of the situation you were in and had probably gone through some grief and violent, horrific experiences, you understand the necessity for security. One of the things that you learn in combat is that you don't want to repeat patterns. When I was a soldier, we repeated this pattern once. We were overrun, and many of my squad were killed and wounded. So when we brought in someone else and new members, they didn't know this. They didn't understand how imperative it was to not repeat patterns. And one night we repeated a pattern, and the corporal that was in charge went back to the same place, and we were hit and lost my cap unit again. So I've got this thing that's inside of me that doesn't want to repeat patterns, and it's odd. I still have it. I can't go to the grocery store the same way twice. I can't go to different places the same way. It's repeating a pattern, and I know it's stupid, and I'll think it in my head, don't do this. Don't let this bother you. Just go to the store. You're not going to be hurt. No one's going to attack you. But I still think about that, and it's bothered me all these years. You can do every single thing right when you're in war, everything, and still be killed. So what you want to try to do is eliminate those things that would lead towards your demise, and that means being more secure.
Those first years were kind of a hazy drug and alcohol stupor for the most part. I would have bouts of depression and lots of drinking and lots of marijuana use. And the anger that was involved was usually internalized. And as it turns out now, I know that depression and anger are kind of fairly common. And as my therapist said, that alcohol is the drug of choice for dealing with PTSD. So it's like I was right on schedule and doing things just the way they're supposed to do them, or you're not supposed to do them.
In the earlier stages of post-traumatic stress, there's also a violent stage. I remember when I came home, I'd been in the battlefield just, days before, and then eventually it was weeks before, but I had this feeling that life was not so important, and that it could be easily taken away. And so I remember one time I went out to a club with a couple of my friends, and there was going to be a fight, and they were all excited about having a fight, and I didn't want to fight this person, and I just said, if we're going to fight, I'm just going to kill you, and that's all. I'll go get a gun and I will kill you, and it'll be done. I didn't want to engage, and it felt normal, and it felt comforting to know that I had some power and control, and that I could defend myself easily. And so I felt that killing people still would be the right thing to do. That took me quite a while, to work with that. Then I went through various stages of violence, and that would, be, it wasn't so much uncontrollable, but it was just violent acts that I had over the years. And of course, alcohol and trying to mask this pain and situations.
Your whole psyche changes, just to survive, because every second you have to be hyper vigilant of what's going on and potential deadfalls that you might fall into. And then when you come back, you're still in that whole mindset, and it just doesn't go away. For me, I just ended up doing risky things just to get that whole feeling again, because it was such I call it like a perverse high. It's just like you just to survive, you had to be on that whole different level, and if just to come back in normal life, it wasn't, just didn't get it.
One of the ways I coped was I eventually got a job after they cut my pension back from the initial 100% down to 60. I had to get working, so I ended up into the jewelry industry, being a bench jeweler, and that suited me really well because I was able to work under my little magnifier and close everything out, and everything was just right. You know, I could bring my world into this much space, and that was a safe place. It was a secure place. That and riding motorcycles fast. And during that period, I was probably crashing more than was advisable. When I crashed in 2000, I rolled lengthwise, and the impact folded disc, snapped my clavicle, and split my scapula. That made it impossible for me to work for quite a while. And it was through working and doing horses, keeping myself occupied and busy all the time, that I was able to keep myself on an even keel. When this happened, I could no longer ride, I could no longer work, and things just started to fall apart. I had a breakdown, an emotional mental breakdown of some sort. Shortly before that happened, I got a mailing from the VA that one of the guys up there in the PTSD unit just sent out a card saying, you know, how are you guys doing? If you need us, we have, you know, we're here. We have help available. And I found that card after, when I was in the really black hole. Called them up, got into the program.
When you have children, you have this unrealistic fear of them being hurt, and consequently it impacted on my children. I was afraid when they went swimming, afraid that when they were out of my sight. I just liked them to be around. Even now, as they're adults and going on with their lives, I still feel better if I can see them. One of the symptoms relative to post-traumatic stress disorder that I experienced at the very beginning when I came home, and have experienced it for all of my life since. But I didn't recognize it until a few years ago. And that symptom has impacted on my family and impacted on my life in ways that I can understand and see. But for a long time, it was hard to recognize. And that is my unhappiness. I would be with my family experiencing something that was joyful, and then right in the middle of it, I'd stop and recognize that what I'm experiencing is joyful, and that I was alive, and my friends were dead. And so I went back to being unhappy. And that's probably the biggest thing I'm still trying to overcome.
It was pretty overwhelming for most of the time, and after a while it would just be, you just kind of, I did, and I'm sure most people just became almost like a robot, just did the work, did the nursing job, and kept very detached emotionally from what was actually going on, because otherwise it would have been unbearable. And so all that stuff was just kind of repressed and went inside, and that's when you don't get the stuff out and you don't talk about it. That's when PTSD becomes a problem. You know, you've got this box, and everything's like stuffed inside this box, and there's a lid on it, and you know, you can only put so much of it in there, and then when that seal is broken, it just kind of goes haywire.
You may, as a spouse of a veteran, recognize the problems and be absolutely convinced that your loved one needs help. But if they aren't ready, it doesn't do any good. If they aren't ready to make that commitment, because it can be very frightening.
It's like picking a scab, you know, it's like we opened a wound, and so it does have an effect on everybody around us when you're trying to bring back all these memories and deal with them, you know, and try to
it's like
relive them.
It's like in some ways you wonder if it would be better to just keep it all inside the box and never get it opened up, because, there are some pretty rough times to go through to deal with it. But at the same time, living on the edge like that all the time, living on the edge of just when is that box going to open up and just go flying, that's not a good way to live either.
PTSD actually causes biomechanical changes in your brain. If you can get therapy soon enough after an occurrence, it can be pretty much ameliorated. But if you don't get it, over time, that change becomes permanent. So you actually, and I've done some more reading about it and seen some recent research that shows there is actually a physical change in the brain structure. So once you've been untreated for a while, then the best you can do is learn to live with it. Instead of using illicit drugs now, I get an antidepressant, an anti-anxiety drug, and 2 different kinds of pain pills that I live on daily. It's like, you're gonna be taking drugs one way or another. So it's just who's gonna supervise and which kind. Meditation, I don't think can eliminate the need for the, and I suppose it depends on the individuals too, but what the meditation does is it gives you an opportunity to let some of that screaming crazedness diffuse a little bit.
There is this societal stigma of being strong and tough, and that if you show an emotional or a mental injury, and that's what it is, that you are less than. There is an increase of Vietnam veterans that are recognizing the trauma again, and they're coming in to seek help. I think that that's true because we're providing more information for them, but it's also because we're getting older. And a natural progress or process for all human beings is that when they get older, they become nostalgic, they become reflective, and they think back not about their hot rod, but about the weapon they carried, and not about the fraternity they were in, but the brotherhood of soldiers that they lived and fought with and sometimes died. And so I think those feelings are welling up inside and are becoming more profound, and that will cause them to seek help for it.
So we have sought help through the VA and have various means, and when we see some red flags come up that causes us to snap into this PTSD mode, then we can, you know, at least maybe foresee it or kind of curtail a lot of them, which we couldn't do before because we really hadn't the tools to do it. I'm just hoping that these current vets coming back now, that they can learn from what the Vietnam vets started was as far as the PTSD, and have it diagnosed and get some help right off the bat, and don't have to wallow in it for years and years. You know.
One of the things that's impacted the healing for veterans is that society has changed in their regard to veterans. Now our veterans are loved and appreciated, and they're welcomed at ball games, and they're given a prestige in our society that wasn't there after Vietnam. And I think this prestige has helped our current soldiers returning from Iraq and Afghanistan, but it's also helped veterans from Korea and from Vietnam, and even the few remaining soldiers that are now living from World War II. It's given them a sense of pride and prestige, and in turn helps them deal with the trauma that they still carry.
We were patriotic and believed the government, even though we had questions at the time. But you know, the essence is like if you put your life on the line on a daily basis, minute by minute, every time, all the time you're over there, for months at a time, and then when you find out that it's all for naught, that it's just a big, bright and shining lie, I can't even explain to you what it feels like.
It's just all so senseless that this is happening again. It's just so wrong.
A lot of the guys that are coming back now, so many of them went into the military with because of their idealism, and they have that gung ho, you know, yada yada thing going on, which you saw in a lot of you still see in Marines that were in Nam. A lot of them that still do not accept that Nam is so bogus, because you know, their self-worth is so tied up in their service that if there's anything that impugns the nature of that service, there's a wall that goes up immediately. So you have guys coming back from Iraq that have that same thing going on, and they just will not accept that this is not a noble venture, and that anything that they've experienced can have a deleterious effect on them. It takes a while for it to soak in, and by the time it's soaked in, it can be too late.
You know, I came back to the States and it was like nurses couldn't do anything anymore. You know, you had, well, that's something the doctor does. And I did that every day over there, you know, so I ended up working in intensive care units for a lot of the time. I cut back and didn't do as many hours, and just kind of gradually weaned myself away from nursing until the point where I finally said that I could not do it anymore. I could not be a nurse anymore. So I'm going to be working in my garden, and I am taking some painting classes, but I'm not far enough along that I'm willing to share that.
It's taken me, oh, you know, 20-some years maybe, if not more, to finally downgrade it to the point that now it's, for me, gardening is, I find it very therapeutic, and pretty much what I do in the summertime is every day I'm gardening, watering, planting different things.
But like I said, it's always there. It's always there, and something can happen to remind you of it. And
Just
and
anything,
for both
any
of
little
us,
thing, you know, it's like a helicopter. You hear a helicopter and it just
yeah.
starts the whole process, you know, on your mind. Or fireworks. The majority of veterans, I could just second guess that they're probably just kind of not dealing with it, and that, I think, is when it does the multi-generational. It just kind of, all your attitude, all your anger just gets passed on, you know, through your kids, and I'm sure we're dealing with stuff from the Second World War, from our parents or our grandparents from the First World War, or as far as that goes, in the Civil War. You know, it just keeps getting passed down, and hopefully, you know, with enough recognition that it'll cease. You know, people can get help and just stop the process.
This is my therapist. Come on, buddy. This is my primary therapist. Spot the dog. With Mr. Hedgehog. Whenever things are difficult, you can always rely on Budster. Oh, yes, he watches me. When I get tight and when I'm having a bad time, he comes and he says, hey, it's okay. It's okay. His sister is very helpful too.
There's a Buddhist saying that with the movement of my hand, I can change the composition of the world. If you know of someone that is a soldier or was in Afghanistan or Iraq or even Vietnam, if you call them up on Veterans Day and say, I just wanted you to know that I'm thinking of you, and I want to thank you for what you did. Being appreciated will go a long ways in helping heal the pain associated with war.
We kind of have the system with our gardening. I mean, he definitely likes to do the vegetables, and I like to can them and that kind of stuff. And as far as the flowers, I usually go shop and find the flowers and stuff, and then if it's in a great big pot or something, a lot of times it'll sit there till Pat finally can't handle it anymore, and then he'll plant it for me. He'll say, is this where you want it? So we have the system.
Well, this is all south facing here, so our garden extends from that corner there and goes all the way across here. We've got corn and beans over in that plot, tomatoes here. These are potatoes. I have
Broccoli.
red, white, and blue potatoes here. These potatoes are about ready to be dug, I think. See some there. Got like 20 tomato plants of all different kinds, heirloom tomatoes, and these are little cherry tomatoes here. Pretty sweet. Try one.
Obviously, we haven't weeded here, and there's zinnias and dahlias, and they're competing with these weeds. So I wanted to do this yesterday, and it was too hot, so I'm going to just do a little bit here.